They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but I prefer it served in a glass boardroom, wrapped in a high-level Japanese honorific. My boss thought he could steal 5 years of my life, replace me with a 24-year-old crypto bro, and joke about my firing to our foreign clients. He was so confident in his terrible translation app. He did not know I spent 6 years building foundations in Osaka. Now, he is facing 20 years in federal prison. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Boss Revenge Stories. Before we begin, I want to sincerely thank you for your incredible support. But unfortunately, YouTube has completely demonetized our channel, leaving us without the budget to keep operating here. Because of this, we are forced to pause all new uploads on YouTube for the foreseeable future and will be moving our operations over to Patreon. If you enjoy today's story, please consider supporting us by joining our Patreon, where you will find exclusive, true stories that are even better, much longer, and filled with detailed situations we simply cannot publish publicly on YouTube, all brought to life by multiple emotional voice actors. You can join us by scanning the Patreon QR code on your screen right now, or by clicking the link in the video description or pinned comment. Now, let us get into today's story about Chloe Mitchell and the ultimate corporate betrayal. Aetherist Design Build was the kind of high-end Chicago architectural firm where the coffee was imported. The walls were made of frosted glass, and corporate loyalty was absolutely non-existent. I am Chloe Mitchell, a 34-year-old structural architect, and for the past 5 years, I have been the invisible spine holding this company together. Marcus Thorne, my direct boss and the project manager, walked into my office on a Tuesday morning. He carried the overpowering scent of a $200 cologne and wore the condescending smile of a man who had never done a hard day of physical work in his life. Trailing right behind him was a kid who looked like he had just walked out of a cryptocurrency convention. "Chloe," Marcus said, leaning against my drafting desk as if he owned it, "I want you to meet Tyler. I need you to let him shadow you for the next few weeks. The higher-ups are really pushing for cross-resource optimization this quarter." Cross-resource optimization, I nodded politely, but a cold, hard realization settled in the pit of my stomach. I had been in the corporate world long enough to know exactly what that jargon meant. It was a carefully disguised death sentence for my career. They wanted me to train my 24-year-old, significantly cheaper replacement. Tyler was the absolute epitome of a modern corporate amateur. He wore a branded fleece vest, constantly checked his smartwatch, and never missed an opportunity to talk about how artificial intelligence was going to revolutionize and automate the entire architecture industry. The irony was physically painful. He spent hours lecturing me about machine learning optimization, but when I handed him a standard foundation blueprint for a 60-story commercial high-rise, his eyes glazed over completely. He literally could not read a basic structural plan. He had no idea how to calculate wind resistance, no concept of soil mechanics, and could not tell the difference between a critical load-bearing column and a piece of decorative drywall. Yet, this was the genius Marcus wanted to replace me with. Marcus and I had a long, deeply toxic history. For 5 solid years, I had poured my blood and sweat into designing the complex structural systems that kept our award-winning skyscrapers from collapsing into the Chicago River. But every single time a project was completed, Marcus swooped in to take the glory. He would take my meticulously calculated blueprints, strip away all the brilliant technical nuances, and package them into a shiny PowerPoint presentation full of empty corporate buzzwords. He would stand in front of the board of directors, flashing his bright white teeth, claiming all the credit for the architectural marvels I had built. He played the visionary leader, while I remained the silent workhorse locked in the background. Now he wanted to put the workhorse out to pasture. Tyler was relentless in his ignorance. He would sit right next to me, breathing his iced matcha latte breath over my monitors, asking the most mind-numbingly stupid questions while secretly recording my screen on his tablet. "Hey, Chloe, how exactly do you run the quantity takeoff process for the reinforced steel?" Tyler asked one afternoon, his eyes fixed on my software interface. He was not trying to learn the craft. He was trying to copy and paste the entire proprietary workflow I had spent 5 grueling years building from scratch. He wanted my brain on a silver platter so he could claim it as his own. A lesser person would have screamed, thrown a keyboard, or marched straight down to human resources to file a massive complaint, but I did not. I kept my posture perfectly straight, maintained a warm, highly professional smile, and taught Tyler every single thing he asked for. Of course, Tyler, let me show you exactly how we input the structural metrics, I told him. But behind my polite smile, I went to work in the shadows. I knew that architectural software is only as smart as the engineer who configures it. I started carefully designing small, highly complex data traps deep within our main project files. I subtly altered the gravity load parameters and embedded recursive reference formulas deep within the structural estimation spreadsheets. To an untrained amateur like Tyler, the data looked completely standard, perfectly optimized, and ready to present. But to a core expert, those files were ticking time bombs. If someone blindly exported my blueprints and attempted to use them without knowing the precise mathematical sequence to unlock the true metrics, the entire material safety report would become catastrophically inaccurate. I patiently guided Tyler through his fake learning journey, handing over the keys to a kingdom I had secretly rigged to collapse, quietly setting the stage for a disaster Marcus would never see coming. The stakes for our firm had never been higher. Aetheris was in the final bidding stages for a massive $350 million eco-resort megaproject. The potential client was Kuroda Holdings, an absolute titan of Japanese real estate. Securing this contract meant an unbelievable bonus pool for the executives and an undisputed promotion for whoever landed it. Naturally, Marcus positioned himself at the absolute front and center of the deal. To seal the agreement, Marcus organized a private VIP dinner at an ultra-exclusive, ridiculously expensive steakhouse right in the heart of downtown Chicago. It was the kind of establishment where the lighting was deliberately dim. The leather booths absorbed the sound of million-dollar negotiations, and a single dry-aged ribeye cost more than my weekly groceries. I was forced to attend. Marcus did not invite me because he valued my structural expertise or because I designed the entire foundational framework they were pitching. He dragged me along solely to play the role of his glorified assistant. My only designated purpose was to hold the heavy leather-bound portfolio of physical blueprints, manage the digital tablet, and click the presentation slides exactly when he snapped his fingers. The atmosphere in the private dining room was intensely suffocating, thinly veiled by forced corporate politeness and the clinking of heavy crystal glasses. Across the expansive mahogany table sat the Kuroda delegation, a wall of perfectly tailored dark suits and unreadable expressions. Leading their side was Yumi Ishikawa. She was their chief compliance director, a woman whose razor-sharp intellect practically radiated from her cold, calculating eyes. She sat perfectly upright, barely touching her food, her demeanor an impenetrable fortress of absolute professionalism. Marcus, on the other hand, was unraveling in the exact opposite direction. By the time the main courses were cleared, he was already deep into his fourth glass of expensive Kentucky bourbon. The alcohol flushed his cheeks and completely destroyed whatever professional filter he normally possessed. In a desperate, misguided attempt to charm the Kuroda executives, Marcus began deploying what he clearly believed was impressive Japanese. It was an absolute disaster. He was aggressively stringing together severely mangled phrases he had obviously memorized from a free language translation app on his phone during the cab ride over. His pronunciation was offensive, his grammar was non-existent, and his tone lacked any shred of business etiquette. I watched Yumi Ishikawa closely. She endured his loud, arrogant boasting with the chilling, polite silence of a predator studying a particularly loud and foolish prey. She nodded slightly, her face an unmoving mask, never once betraying the deep secondhand embarrassment she must have felt. The conversation inevitably shifted to the core mechanics of the eco-resort. Yumi placed her napkin delicately on the table, fixing her sharp gaze directly on Marcus. In flawless, highly sophisticated English, she inquired about the long-term sustainability metrics of our structural materials, specifically questioning the stress tolerances I had calculated for the seismic baseline. Instead of answering her highly technical question, or heaven forbid, allowing the actual structural architect sitting quietly to his left to answer it. Marcus let out a loud, obnoxious laugh. He waved his hand dismissively, clearly feeling incredibly confident in his drunken state. He leaned heavily across the table toward one of the senior Japanese executives sitting next to Yumi, convinced he was establishing some sort of secret brotherhood of management. Marcus dropped his voice into a conspiratorial whisper and spoke in his butchered, app-learned Japanese. "Do not worry about the design limits." Marcus stumbled through the foreign words, butchering the honorifics completely. "That designer girl right there is way too rigid. She is a massive headache. I will fire her next month anyway and replace her with a much cheaper system." He leaned back into his leather chair. A smug, self-satisfied smirk plastered across his flushed face. He shot a brief, mocking glance in my direction. He was absolutely certain I was completely oblivious. In his narrow, arrogant mind, I was just a naive, monolingual white American woman from the Midwest who only understood English and architectural software. He thought he had just effortlessly sold me out right to my face without me ever knowing. What Marcus Thorne did not know, what he had never bothered to read in my human resources file because he was too busy stealing my work, was that my background was not entirely Midwestern. Before I ever set foot in Ethirus, I spent 6 grueling years working as a primary field engineer in Osaka. I did not just speak conversational Japanese, I spoke flawless, highly complex technical and legal Japanese. I understood the subtle hierarchical layers of the language, the precise vocabulary of corporate negotiation, and every single mangled syllable of the death sentence he had just casually handed down to me. The suffocating heat in the room suddenly vanished, replaced by an icy, absolute clarity. The years of quiet resentment, the stolen credit, the silent toleration of his gross incompetence, all crystallized into a singular, razor-sharp focus in my mind. I did not gasp. I did not drop my tablet. I simply reached forward, picked up my crystal glass of iced lemon water, and took a slow, measured sip. I smiled warmly at Marcus, letting him bask in his imaginary victory. He thought he had just guaranteed my termination. He had no idea he had just dug his own professional grave, and I was going to ensure he never saw the next month as a free man. The morning after the steakhouse dinner, the office air felt entirely different in my lungs. It was no longer just a corporate workspace. It was an active crime scene waiting to be meticulously processed. I arrived 2 hours before anyone else, the cool glow of my dual monitors cutting sharply through the darkness of the empty architectural floor. I no longer cared about gathering petty proof that Marcus was stealing my structural designs. Plagiarism was a basic human resources issue, and in the cutthroat corporate ecosystem, human resources existed solely to protect the company, which inevitably meant protecting rainmakers like Marcus. I needed something far more devastating. I needed a federal financial crime. My entry point was sitting right next to my desk. Breathing softly in the form of a 24-year-old corporate amateur, Tyler was entirely obsessed with artificial intelligence, but had the cybersecurity habits of an irresponsible teenager. He constantly left his tablet connected to the firm's central intranet, his administrative permissions wide open, and his network passwords, written on bright yellow sticky notes, hidden poorly beneath his ergonomic keyboard, using his unsecured terminal as a digital proxy. I easily bypassed the standard employee firewalls. I masked my digital footprint entirely by routing my connection through Tyler's cloud backup software. If the information technology department ever ran a security sweep, they would only see a confused intern blindly syncing his files. Moving silently, I slipped into Marcus's heavily encrypted private server directories. For the past 3 weeks, I had noticed a highly suspicious anomaly in our supply chain software. The vendor logs were constantly glitching. Marcus had been manually overriding the automated procurement protocols, constantly shifting our approved material contractors in the middle of the night. It did not make sense for a high-level project manager to involve himself so deeply in the raw material sourcing unless there was a hidden financial margin to exploit. I cracked open his locked procurement folders, my eyes scanning rapidly through hundreds of purchase orders and subcontractor bids. The deeper I dug into the digital architecture, the colder my blood ran. This was not a simple case of standard corporate kickbacks. It was a structural death trap. The Kuroda Eco Resort was fundamentally designed to sit directly on a highly active seismic fault line. My foundational specifications strictly required grade 80 high strength, low alloy structural steel to absorb massive potential tremors. I found the hidden ledger buried in a subfolder. Marcus had gone into the final project manifest and completely scrubbed my specified materials. In its place, he had inserted a verified purchase order for a massively downgraded, cheap imported carbon steel from a third-tier overseas supplier. This flimsy material did not even meet the absolute minimum American safety standards for a basic two-story parking garage, let alone a $350 million luxury mega resort. The gross margin between the required high-yield tensile steel and the cheap, brittle substitute he ordered was absolutely staggering. We were talking about a discrepancy of over $4 million. That massive sum of money was not going back into the Aetheris corporate accounts. Marcus had cleverly routed the massive surplus through a complex labyrinth of fake consulting fees and bloated logistics charges, funneling the stolen cash directly into a private offshore holding account. He was fully willing to risk a catastrophic building collapse, potentially killing thousands of innocent people, just to pocket a multi-million-dollar margin. But the severe financial embezzlement was only the first layer of his deep professional rot. I kept tracing the external Internet Protocol addresses linked to his outgoing file transfers. The main security logs showed that massive data packets were being sent out of the private network at exactly 2 a.m. every single Sunday. I aggressively decrypted the destination servers and found a corporate shell company registered quietly in Delaware. A quick public records cross-reference revealed the registered legal owner of this phantom corporation. It was Marcus's first cousin. Through this virtually untraceable front, Marcus was systematically exporting my highly proprietary structural blueprints, the exact same designs he arrogantly claimed were too rigid, and selling them directly to a massive rival contracting firm based in Asia. He was double-dipping in the most treacherous way mathematically possible. He was actively sabotaging the Kuroda deal from the inside, while illegally selling the foundational architecture to their most aggressive market competitors. The sheer scale of his arrogance was truly breathtaking. He honestly thought he was completely untouchable. He thought the digital systems he manipulated were far too complex for anyone to trace. He was dead wrong. I did not just take simple desktop screenshots. Screenshots can be easily dismissed by expensive lawyers as digitally altered fakes. I performed a full, comprehensive digital autopsy. I meticulously packed every single illegal transaction, every fraudulently altered purchase order, and every diverted blueprint into a highly encrypted, read-only forensic file format. I ruthlessly extracted the raw, immutable metadata, pulling the exact timestamps, the specific Internet Protocol addresses, and the unalterable digital signatures that tied every single catastrophic decision directly to Marcus's private administrative credentials. Then, I began the real, devastating work. Sitting in the quiet hum of the server room, I began translating his entire criminal enterprise. I did not use standard, everyday conversational language. I aggressively utilized my 6 years of intense field experience in Osaka to draft a flawless, hyper-specific forensic report in the highest, most complex level of Japanese legal and structural terminology. I detailed the exact seismic risk factors, the severe violations of the international building codes, and the precise money laundering pathways. I perfectly translated every fraudulent invoice and every stolen blueprint manifest. I built an airtight, mathematically undeniable prosecution case, wrapped entirely in a language Marcus could not even begin to comprehend. The digital guillotine was perfectly assembled. Now, I just needed the perfect executioner to pull the lever. In the hyper-competitive ecosystem of Aetheris Design Build, human resources did not exist to protect the employees. They existed solely to protect the revenue streams. Marcus Thorne was a rainmaker. He brought in hundreds of millions of dollars in corporate contracts, regardless of how many technical corners he cut or how many subordinate careers he destroyed in the process. If I walked into the human resources department with a flash drive full of evidence, They would not fire him. They would instantly confiscate my data, terminate my employment under some fabricated non-disclosure clause, and quietly sweep his financial crimes deep under the corporate rug to save the Kuroda deal. If I wanted to execute Marcus, I could not use the blunt, useless weapons provided by my own company. I needed to borrow a much sharper knife from the outside. I needed a corporate assassin. I waited until I was safely inside the soundproof walls of my own apartment. Before I initiated the contact, I bypassed the Etherius internal email servers entirely. Using a deeply encrypted, offshore virtual private network and a secure, untraceable mail account, I drafted a direct message to Yumi Ishikawa at the Kuroda Holdings headquarters in Tokyo. I did not write a long, emotional plea. I did not complain about a toxic workplace or stolen credit. Women like Yumi did not deal in emotions. They dealt in absolute facts and mitigated risks. I crafted the subject line using the absolute highest, most complex tier of traditional Japanese honorifics. It was a level of extreme, formal politeness reserved only for addressing top-tier executives during matters of grave corporate urgency. A linguistic tone that demanded immediate, undivided respect. The body of the email contained absolutely no pleasantries. It consisted of exactly one single sentence, translated perfectly into sharp, unforgiving Japanese. There is a fatal flaw in the foundation of your future home. Attached to that single, chilling sentence was one carefully extracted document. It was the forged material manifest Marcus had hidden on his private server. The exact purchase order proving he had intentionally downgraded the seismic steel to cheap, unsafe carbon variants, to pocket the multi-million-dollar price difference. I hit send, securely erased the digital footprint from my local machine, and sat back in the dark, watching the clock on my wall. I knew the time difference between Chicago and Tokyo meant Yumi was currently sitting at her desk in the middle of her afternoon workflow. I also knew that a chief compliance director of her caliber would recognize a catastrophic liability the exact second she saw one. Exactly 15 minutes later, my encrypted inbox chimed softly in the quiet room. The reply from Yumi was as cold and precise as the woman herself. She did not ask who I was. She did not express shock, outrage, or disbelief. The response contained no greeting and no sign-off. It was just one brutal, highly demanding sentence in English. Provide the raw, unedited source files and the metadata proving administrative authorization immediately. A slow, dangerous smile spread across my face. The alliance was officially forged in the shadows. For the next 7 days, my life split into two completely different realities. During the daylight hours at the Etherius office, I played the role of the defeated, oblivious workhorse perfectly. I maintained a quiet, deeply subdued demeanor, looking exactly like a woman who knew her termination papers were being drafted. I sat next to Tyler, enduring his endless vapid monologues about technology algorithms, and patiently walked him through the structural software. I watched him diligently take notes, entirely unaware that the system parameters I was teaching him were essentially rigged to mathematically implode. Marcus strutted around the floor, radiating arrogant confidence, shooting me pitying, mocking looks whenever he passed my desk. He was fully convinced he had successfully buried me. But the second the sun went down and I locked the door to my apartment, I transformed. Every single night, the polite, quiet architect vanished, and I became the primary ammunition supplier for the most terrifying, ruthless legal department in all of Tokyo. Through our untraceable channel, Yumi and I executed a flawless, silent dance of corporate warfare. We never spoke on the phone. We never exchanged a single unnecessary word. She would send a highly encrypted request demanding a specific ledger, a routing number, or a blueprint variation. Within 2 hours, I would surgically extract the exact data packets from Marcus's compromised server, translate the complex structural implications into flawless legal Japanese, and transmit the digital bullets directly into her hands. I fed Yumi the offshore shell company records. I gave her the hidden Internet Protocol logs proving Marcus was illegally selling proprietary designs to their Asian competitors. I delivered every single piece of metadata required to legally tie the massive fraud directly to his personal corporate credentials. I was handing Kuroda Holdings the exact tools they needed to completely gut Aether's design build, and by extension, completely destroy Marcus Thorne. The trap was set, heavily loaded, and completely invisible. Now, all we had to do was wait for Marcus to take the final, fatal step. The illusion of absolute control is the most dangerous trap in any corporate war. You believe you hold every single card, right up until the moment the entire table violently flips over. It happened on a Thursday afternoon, precisely at 3 o'clock. I had severely underestimated the sheer, desperate paranoia of a guilty man. Marcus was reckless with his public boasting and his terrible translations, but he was fiercely, violently protective of his stolen money. I had secretly installed an automated, deeply hidden legacy security patch on his deepest procurement folders. When I extracted the final batch of modified material logs for Yumi exactly 48 hours earlier, my digital proxy must have brushed against a silent, delayed tripwire buried deep within the system registry. Marcus received an encrypted ping alerting him that someone was actively digging into the carbon steel manifests. A normal person would panic and run, but cornered corporate predators rarely flee. They launch devastating, preemptive strikes. I noticed the first sign of the ambush when my architectural drafting software suddenly froze for exactly 15 seconds. It was a severe micro-stutter, the exact kind of system lag that only happens when massive amounts of data are being forcefully written onto a local hard drive through an administrative override. I pulled up my background system monitor and watched the processing capacity instantly spike to 99%. Marcus was utilizing his Supreme Project Manager network credentials to bypass my local firewalls completely. He was not just locking me out, he was actively remote dropping highly classified, proprietary company data directly into my personal, hidden directories. But Marcus did not stop at simply planting the stolen blueprints on my machine. A successful frame job requires a clear motive and an undeniable paper trail. While I was sitting at my desk, completely paralyzed and locked out of my own terminal by his administrative override, Marcus was busy spoofing my internal internet protocol address. He meticulously crafted over 24 fake email chains, maliciously timestamping them retroactively over the past 6 months. I explicitly designed these communications to make it look like I was the bitter mastermind actively communicating with the Asian rival contractors. He mirrored the exact same offshore shell accounts he was using for his own embezzlement, but he surgically swapped his digital signature for mine. He even included fake chat logs, where I supposedly complained about my lack of promotions, providing the perfect psychological motive. He was legally, methodically transferring the entire weight of his economic espionage operation directly onto my shoulders. If anyone from the federal authorities or the information technology department seized my hard drive at this exact moment, they would not see a heroic whistleblower. They would see a disgruntled, 34-year-old structural architect who was actively selling millions of dollars worth of company secrets to destroy the firm that refused to advance her career. The sheer speed of his retaliation was absolutely suffocating. Within 30 minutes of framing my hard drive, Marcus drafted an emergency executive report. He bypassed the standard human resources protocols entirely, knowing they moved too slowly. Instead, he sent the red-flagged, fabricated dossier directly to the board of directors sitting in the top-floor executive suites of Aether's. He demanded an immediate, closed-door disciplinary tribunal. He formally recommended my immediate termination and aggressively pushed for the firm to press federal charges against me for grand corporate treason, fraud, and economic espionage. He wanted me financially ruined, federally imprisoned, and completely silenced before I could ever utter a single word about his fatal foundations. The walls of the office were rapidly closing in around me. I could feel a cold, sharp sweat forming at the base of my neck. The air grew thin. My perfectly calculated revenge plan felt like it was violently crumbling into dust. Then, a shadow fell over my desk. It was Tyler. He was holding his expensive tablet tightly to his chest. His face twisted into an expression of highly practiced, completely fake sympathy. "Hey, Chloe," Tyler said, lowering his voice to a loud, theatrical whisper that carried perfectly to the neighboring cubicles. Marcus just told me to prep my system to take over your entire Active Directory and all your current project folders. He said you are being called upstairs right now. I do not know what is going on, but good luck at your next firm. I will make sure your legacy lives on in the new artificial intelligence optimization models." He smiled. It was a chillingly arrogant smirk from a 24-year-old amateur who truly believed he had just won the corporate lottery by simply outlasting me. The sheer audacity of his smugness made my blood boil. I wanted to scream. I wanted to stand up and smash his expensive tablet into 1,000 tiny pieces, but I forced my breathing to slow down, inhaling sharply through my nose. I remembered the rigged data trap sleeping quietly in those exact files he was so unbelievably eager to steal. "Thank you, Tyler," I replied, my voice dropping to a dangerously steady, quiet tone. "I am absolutely sure you will get exactly what you deserve out of those files." Exactly 2 minutes later, the inevitable notification popped up in the center of my frozen screen. It was an urgent, mandatory calendar invite originating directly from the Chief Executive Officer, heavily populated by the head of legal counsel and the Director of Human Resources. The subject line was completely blank. The location was the top-floor glass boardroom. The time was right now. The corporate guillotine was officially raised. I did not panic. I did not scramble frantically to delete the planted files on my computer, because tampering with them now would only instantly prove my guilt in the eyes of the board's forensic team. I calmly reached into my leather bag and pulled out my encrypted personal phone. I opened the secure, untraceable communication channel I had established with Tokyo. I did not type a frantic, emotional message pleading for help. I did not explain that Marcus had outmaneuvered me and that I was about to be brutally fired and federally charged. I simply typed one single character, a single period. I hit send. It was the prearranged, ultimate signal, the silent alarm that meant the trap had been sprung. I stood up slowly, smoothed out the sharp creases in my tailored blazer, and picked up my blank notebook. I walked straight toward the main elevator banks, stepping willingly into the execution chamber, knowing perfectly well that the game was no longer a secret. Quiet investigation. The final, explosive battle had officially arrived. The top-floor glass boardroom of Aetherist Design Build was designed to intimidate. It suspended you hundreds of feet above the Chicago streets, surrounded by panoramic windows that offered no comfort and nowhere to hide. When I walked through the heavy double doors, the atmosphere was instantly suffocating. The chief executive officer sat at the absolute head of the massive polished mahogany table. Flanking him were the director of human resources and the lead corporate counsel, both looking entirely grim. Standing at the front of the room, controlling the main presentation screen, was Marcus. He had completely abandoned his usual arrogant smirk. Instead, he was putting on a masterclass performance of a deeply wounded, heartbroken leader. Projected onto the massive 80-inch screen behind him were the fabricated emails and the planted blueprint manifests. "It deeply pains me to bring this before the board," Marcus said, placing his hand softly on the table. His voice was laced with a sickly, artificial sorrow. "Chloe has been with us for 5 years, but the digital forensics do not lie. I caught an anomaly in the firewall protocols yesterday evening. When I ran a diagnostic, I found these unauthorized offshore data transfers originating directly from her terminal. She has been actively selling our proprietary structural foundations to our direct competitors in Asia. She is trying to sabotage the Kuroda mega project out of pure spite for not being promoted." The chief executive officer turned his gaze toward me. His eyes were completely devoid of any empathy. In the corporate world, loyalty only extends as far as the latest profit margin. To him, the fabricated evidence on the screen was absolute gospel. "This is a catastrophic breach of trust," the chief executive officer stated, his voice echoing sharply against the glass walls. "We are terminating your employment immediately, effective this very second. You will surrender all company property. Legal counsel is actively preparing a federal filing for economic espionage. I am calling corporate security to have you escorted out of this building." He reached across the polished wood to press the red intercom button on the central conference phone. His finger hovered exactly 1 inch above the device. He never pushed it. The heavy glass boardroom doors did not just open, they were aggressively pushed wide open. Hitting the rubber wall stops with a violent, echoing thud. The entire board jumped in their seats. Walking into the room without a single appointment, badge, or escort was Yumi Ishikawa. She was flanked by 3 imposing men wearing sharp, dark suits, the most feared corporate litigation team in all of Tokyo. The sudden intrusion was completely unprecedented. Aetherist security had entirely failed to stop them, likely paralyzed by the sheer authority radiating from the Kuroda delegation. Marcus instantly dropped his fake sorrow. His face turned completely pale, but his desperate survival instinct kicked in. He forced a wide, completely unhinged smile and practically ran toward the door. He bowed awkwardly and began spewing his terrible, broken Japanese, desperately trying to save face in front of the board. "Welcome, welcome," Marcus stammered out, butchering the greeting horribly. "We are just handling a small internal human resources issue." Yumi did not even blink. She completely ignored his existence, stepping flawlessly around him as if he were a piece of misplaced furniture. She walked directly to the head of the table, without breaking eye contact with the chief executive officer. She raised a massive, 2-inch thick legal binder and dropped it squarely onto the polished mahogany. The heavy thud rattled the crystal water glasses. "We are canceling the $350 million contract immediately," Yumi announced. Her English was absolutely perfect, cutting through the silence like a freshly sharpened blade. "Unless you read every single page of this document right now." The chief executive officer stared at the binder, completely paralyzed. He slowly opened the cover. The legal counsel leaned in closely. The room descended into a heavy, terrifying silence, broken only by the sharp sound of thick paper pages turning. They were looking at the digital autopsy I had meticulously built over the past week, but it was no longer just raw data. Yumi's legal team had weaponized it. The board saw the undeniable proof that Marcus had manually downgraded the foundational steel to cheap, highly dangerous carbon variants. They saw the exact money trail routing $4 million directly into his cousin's offshore shell company. Most importantly, the final section contained the certified metadata analysis from Tokyo's top cybersecurity firm, mathematically proving that Marcus had used his administrative credentials to plant the fake espionage files on my computer exactly 1 hour ago. I watched the chief executive officer's face. The transformation was truly cinematic. His expression shifted from righteous anger directed at me to utter confusion, and finally settled into absolute, unadulterated horror as he looked up at Marcus. "You replaced the seismic supports," the chief executive officer whispered, his voice trembling with the realization that their flagship project was a literal death trap. "You stole from the firm. You tried to frame her to cover your own tracks." Marcus was physically shaking. The confident, untouchable rainmaker was rapidly crumbling into a pathetic, cornered animal. Sweat beaded on his forehead. He pointed a trembling finger directly at me. "This is a total fabrication," Marcus shouted, his voice cracking loudly. "This is a massive misunderstanding. She set this up. She manufactured these numbers out of pure revenge." The trap had snapped completely shut. I reached up and calmly adjusted the lapel of my tailored blazer. I stood up from my chair slowly, savoring every single microsecond of his absolute destruction. I looked Marcus dead in the eye. The silence in the room was so heavy it felt like it could crush bone. I did not speak in English. I bypassed his native language entirely and spoke in the highest, most fluid, perfectly enunciated tier of traditional Japanese. I spoke with the exact aristocratic tone utilized in high society corporate executions. "Next time, before you joke about firing someone over an expensive dinner, you need to make absolutely sure they do not understand the language you are using to dig your own grave." The entire boardroom froze. The Aetherist executives did not understand the words, but they understood the immense power behind them. Marcus understood enough of his translation app to recognize the absolute perfection of my pronunciation. The color completely drained from his face. His jaw dropped. The realization hit him with the force of a speeding freight train. He had not just been outsmarted, he had been systematically dismantled by the exact woman he had treated like an uneducated servant. Yumi Ishikawa turned her sharp gaze toward the chief executive officer. Kuroda Holdings will only proceed with this partnership under one strict condition, Yumi stated coldly. Mr. Thorne is completely removed from the premises, and Miss Mitchell is immediately appointed as the Supreme Executive Project Manager with full, unchecked control over all foundational engineering. The Chief Executive Officer did not even hesitate. He pressed the red button on his conference phone. Send security to the boardroom immediately, he ordered, and contact the federal authorities. We have a massive case of financial fraud. I did not stay to watch them drag him out. I picked up my blank notebook, offered a small, deeply respectful nod to Yumi, and walked cleanly out of the glass boardroom. I was not walking back to my desk to pack my bags. I was walking down the hall to take the corner office. The workhorse had just bought the entire farm. Thank you all so much for listening to this story today. It truly means the world to me to share these incredible experiences with you. I would love to know where you are listening to this story from, so please let me know in the comments below. If you found today's story entertaining and satisfying, I need to remind you that YouTube has unfortunately demonetized our channel, meaning we will no longer be uploading new videos here for the foreseeable future. We are transitioning entirely to Patreon to keep this community alive. Please help support us by joining the Boss Revenge Stories Patreon, where you can listen to our best, most exclusive true stories that are too detailed and intense to ever be made public on YouTube. You can simply scan the Patreon QR code on your screen right now, or use the link provided in the video description or pinned comment. Thank you again for your amazing support, and I cannot wait to share the next great story with you over there.